Many people assume that when a relationship ends, both people naturally begin moving in separate directions. In healthy relationships, this is often true. Even when there is heartbreak, disappointment, or lingering sadness, emotionally mature individuals eventually accept that the relationship has ended. They respect boundaries, allow space for healing, and gradually shift their focus toward rebuilding their own lives. But narcissistic relationships often operate by a completely different set of rules. One of the clearest signs that a narcissist is still obsessed with you is not necessarily grand romantic gestures or dramatic declarations of love. Instead, it is their persistent determination to remain connected to your life in ways that ignore your need for distance and emotional freedom. Dr. Ramani often explains that narcissistic relationships are not built upon mutual respect or healthy attachment. They are frequently built upon control, validation, and the need to maintain a steady source of narcissistic supply. When you leave the relationship, the narcissist is not only losing a partner, they are losing someone who once provided attention, admiration, emotional reactions, or a sense of power. That loss can feel deeply threatening to someone whose self-worth depends heavily on external validation. As a result, they often look for ways to keep one foot in your life, even when the relationship itself has ended. This continued connection may not always be obvious. Many survivors expect obsession to look dramatic, with endless phone calls or constant messages. While that certainly happens in some cases, narcissistic obsession is often much more subtle. They may accidentally, like an old social media post, months after the breakup. They might send a message asking about an item they left behind, even though they clearly have no real interest in retrieving it. They may suddenly wish you a happy birthday after years of silence, or congratulate you on an achievement they only discovered because they have been quietly monitoring your life. On the surface, these actions may appear harmless. But when viewed as a pattern, rather than isolated incidents, they often reveal an ongoing desire to remain psychologically present. Many survivors make the mistake of interpreting this behavior as evidence that the narcissist still loves them. That interpretation is understandable because most people associate persistence with affection. We grow up hearing stories about people who never gave up on love. We are taught that chasing someone is romantic and that determination is proof of deep emotional commitment. But narcissistic persistence is fundamentally different from healthy love. Healthy love respects boundaries. Healthy love accepts another person's autonomy. Healthy love recognizes that if someone asks for space, honoring that request is an act of respect. A narcissist, however, often struggles to separate love from possession. Instead of thinking, "I hope they find happiness," they think, "Why are they no longer available to me?" This difference changes everything. Imagine moving out of a house after selling it to someone else. A healthy former owner understands that the house now belongs to someone new. They do not continue showing up unannounced, rearranging the furniture, or expecting access whenever they feel nostalgic. But a narcissist often behaves emotionally as though the house still belongs to them. They assume they can walk back into your emotional life simply because they once occupied it. They believe previous access gives them permanent rights, even when you have clearly established boundaries. One common way this obsession appears is through mutual friends. Suddenly, people begin mentioning that your ex asked how you were doing. They seem unusually informed about your recent activities. They know where you traveled, who you spent time with, or what career changes you have made. At first, you may dismiss it as coincidence, but over time, you realize they are collecting information through other people rather than respecting your decision to create distance. They are maintaining a connection without directly contacting you. Social media has made this behavior even easier. A narcissist may rarely interact publicly with your content, yet they know everything you post. They may create anonymous accounts, repeatedly view your stories, or ask others to show them your updates after you have blocked them. Some even maintain fake profiles to continue observing your life without your knowledge. Their goal is not always direct communication. Sometimes it is simply reassurance that they still know what is happening in your world. Why does this matter so much to them? Because information creates the illusion of control. If they know where you are, who you are with, or how you are living, they feel less disconnected from the reality that you are building a life without them. They may convince themselves that they are still somehow involved, even if only as an observer. This allows them to avoid facing the painful truth that your healing continues whether they are present or not. Another common pattern involves creating excuses for contact. The reasons often sound reasonable at first. They need help with paperwork. They remembered something important they forgot to tell you. They found one of your belongings. They want to check on your family member. They need advice about something only you supposedly understand. Individually, these requests may appear innocent, but when they continue long after practical reasons have disappeared, they reveal something deeper. The issue is not the forgotten object or unanswered question. The issue is maintaining an emotional doorway back into your life. Dr. Ramani frequently reminds people that narcissists often test boundaries rather than openly challenge them. Instead of demanding immediate access, they may send a simple message just to see whether you respond. If you answer even briefly, they interpret it as confirmation that the connection still exists. They learn that the emotional door is not completely closed. From there, the communication gradually increases. What begins as a casual conversation can slowly return to the same unhealthy dynamic you worked so hard to escape. This is why maintaining no contact can feel so challenging. The messages themselves are not always hostile. Sometimes they are polite. Sometimes they sound caring. Sometimes they even appear remorseful. But healing requires looking beyond the words and asking a more important question. Does this behavior respect my boundaries, or is it attempting to bypass them? Healthy people accept no, even when it hurts. Healthy people allow silence to remain silence. Healthy people understand that another person's peace matters as much as their own desires. A narcissist often struggles with this because silence feels like rejection rather than a healthy boundary. Instead of respecting your need for distance, they view distance as a problem they must solve. They believe persistence will eventually wear you down. After all, if persistence worked during the relationship, why wouldn't it work afterward? The irony is that many survivors unknowingly reinforce this cycle by responding out of politeness. They do not want to seem rude. They think ignoring a message is cruel. They worry about appearing unforgiving. But there is an important distinction between kindness and access. You can wish someone well without allowing them continued entry into your emotional life. You can forgive someone without reopening the relationship. You can care about another person's humanity while still protecting your own peace. As your healing progresses, something remarkable begins to happen. The behaviors that once confused you become easier to recognize. You stop asking, "Why are they contacting me?" and start asking, "What are they hoping to accomplish?" That shift changes everything. Instead of seeing isolated actions, you begin seeing consistent patterns. Instead of interpreting every message as proof of love, you evaluate whether it demonstrates respect, accountability, and genuine change. More often than not, the answer becomes clear. Real love does not need to monitor you. Real love does not need constant access to you. Real love does not use curiosity as a disguise for control. Real love is secure enough to respect your boundaries, even when doing so is painful. The narcissist may continue searching for ways to stay connected because they cannot imagine a world in which you are fully beyond their reach. But every boundary you maintain sends a powerful message, not necessarily to them, but to yourself. It says, "My healing matters. My peace matters. My emotional safety matters." Over time, those boundaries become more than protection. They become the foundation of a life no longer defined by someone else's need for control. And that is the greatest transformation of all. The narcissist may remain obsessed with staying connected to your life, but you gradually become committed to something far more valuable, staying connected to yourself. That is where real freedom begins, and no amount of monitoring, messaging, or manipulation can take that away. When you first leave a narcissistic relationship, you may expect the narcissist to become angry immediately. You may prepare yourself for endless phone calls, emotional outbursts, or desperate attempts to pull you back. Sometimes that happens, but in many cases, something far more confusing occurs. They appear completely unaffected. They seem to move on overnight. They post pictures smiling with friends, start dating someone new, or act as though the relationship never mattered. To someone who has invested their heart, this can feel devastating. You may begin wondering, did I ever mean anything to them? Or was I that easy to replace? Dr. Ramani often explains that appearances can be incredibly misleading when it comes to narcissistic behavior. A narcissist may look detached on the outside while quietly expecting that you remain emotionally attached on the inside. As long as they believe you are still thinking about them, missing them, or hoping they will come back, they often feel secure. They assume they still occupy the center of your emotional world. Everything changes when they realize that you are genuinely healing. That is the moment their behavior often shifts. It is not necessarily your absence that unsettles them. It is your independence. A narcissistic relationship depends heavily on emotional influence. During the relationship, they learned how to affect your mood. They knew which words would make you cry, which criticisms would make you question yourself, which compliments would make you stay, and which moments of affection would renew your hope. Over time, they became accustomed to seeing themselves as the person who determined your emotional state. Then something remarkable begins to happen during your healing journey. You stop reacting, you stop explaining yourself. You stop defending every decision, you stop seeking their approval, you stop measuring your worth by their opinion. For the first time, your emotional stability no longer depends on their behavior. This is deeply unsettling for someone who has always relied on control. Think of it like a puppeteer who has spent years pulling invisible strings. Every movement of the puppet responds exactly as expected. Then one day, the strings are cut. The puppeteer keeps pulling, but nothing happens. The puppet walks in an entirely different direction. The loss is not simply the puppet, it is the loss of control. That is often what your healing represents to a narcissist. The control they once took for granted is disappearing. One of the first signs they notice is your silence. Not the painful silence that comes from waiting for their message, but the peaceful silence that comes from no longer needing one. You stop checking whether they viewed your stories. You stop wondering who they are dating. You stop asking mutual friends about their life. Your attention gradually returns to your own future. At first, they may not notice. But healing has a way of becoming visible. Perhaps you begin posting less about emotional pain and more about experiences that genuinely bring you joy. Perhaps you reconnect with old friends they discouraged you from seeing. Perhaps you return to hobbies that disappeared during the relationship. Perhaps you pursue a new career, finish a degree, start exercising, travel, or simply begin smiling more often. These changes communicate something powerful without saying a single word. They say, "My life is moving forward." For someone healthy, this would be encouraging. A healthy former partner may feel bittersweet emotions, but ultimately they respect your growth. They understand that healing is part of life. A narcissist often experiences your growth very differently. Your healing challenges the story they tell themselves. Many narcissists secretly believe they are unforgettable, irreplaceable, and permanently central in the lives of former partners. They assume that anyone who leaves them will eventually regret it. This belief protects their fragile sense of self. If they accepted that someone could genuinely thrive without them, they would have to confront painful questions about their own behavior. Instead, they may try to restore the old emotional balance. Sometimes they suddenly reach out after months of silence. Sometimes they become unusually friendly. Sometimes they apologize. Sometimes they become critical. Sometimes they spread rumors. Sometimes they post carefully crafted images designed to provoke jealousy. The specific tactic matters less than the timing. Notice how often these behaviors appear after they realize you are no longer emotionally available. This timing is rarely accidental. Many survivors become confused when the narcissist suddenly seems interested again. They think, maybe they've finally realized what they lost. That is certainly a comforting thought. But Dr. Ramani encourages people to ask a more important question. What changed? Did they suddenly develop empathy? Did they spend months working on accountability? Did they consistently demonstrate emotional maturity? Or did they simply notice that you were becoming less available to them? Those are very different situations. Real transformation takes time, humility, and sustained effort. Temporary attention often reflects something else entirely. Another reason your healing affects them so deeply is because it breaks the emotional hierarchy they created. During the relationship, they occupied the position of evaluator. They decided when you deserved affection. They decided when you received attention. They decided whether your feelings mattered. You were constantly trying to earn emotional security from someone who kept moving the finish line. Healing reverses that dynamic. You stop asking whether they approve of you. Instead, you begin asking whether their behavior deserves access to your life. That single shift changes everything. The person who once judged your worth is no longer the authority in your life. You become the one making decisions about what relationships deserve your time, trust, and emotional energy. That loss of influence can be incredibly difficult for a narcissist to accept. There is another subtle sign they notice. Your confidence begins returning. Not arrogance, not revenge. Confidence. You speak differently. You carry yourself differently. You no longer apologize for having boundaries. You no longer over-explain your choices. You become comfortable saying no without feeling guilty. You begin trusting your own perceptions instead of automatically doubting yourself. This confidence cannot be manipulated as easily as insecurity. That is precisely why it represents such a profound threat to unhealthy dynamics. Perhaps the greatest irony is this. The more focused you become on your own healing, the less interested you become in whether the narcissist is watching. In the beginning, many survivors secretly hope the narcissist notices their growth. They want them to regret losing them. They want acknowledgement. They want justice. These feelings are completely understandable. But real healing gradually changes your motivation. You no longer exercise so they will notice. You exercise because your body deserves care. You no longer pursue your dreams to prove them wrong. You pursue them because they matter to you. You no longer seek happiness as evidence of your value. You seek happiness because peace becomes your new standard. This is emotional freedom. And emotional freedom is something no narcissist can control. Dr. Ramani often reminds survivors that the goal is never to make the narcissist jealous. The goal is to become so emotionally healthy that their reactions no longer determine your choices. That is true recovery, not when they finally apologize. Not when they admit they were wrong, not when they come back, but when their opinions lose the power they once held over your heart. If they react strongly as you heal, it may reveal that they are struggling with the loss of control they once enjoyed. But their reaction is not the measure of your progress. Your progress is measured by something far more meaningful. It is measured by the mornings you wake up without anxiety, by the boundaries you maintain without guilt, by the relationships where you feel safe instead of afraid, by the confidence that grows quietly inside you each day, by the realization that your peace no longer depends on someone else's approval, because the greatest victory is not convincing the narcissist that they lost someone valuable. The greatest victory is realizing that you have finally found yourself again. And once you truly find yourself, no one has the power to make you lose yourself ever again. One of the most revealing signs that a narcissist is still emotionally preoccupied with you is not always found in the messages they send or the attempts they make to contact you. Sometimes it is found in something much more subtle but equally damaging: their determination to control the story people believe about you. Long after the relationship has ended, they may continue talking about you, explaining the breakup from their perspective, portraying themselves as the victim, exaggerating your mistakes, or rewriting history in ways that protect their image. At first, this behavior can be deeply confusing. You may wonder, if they truly moved on, why are they still talking about me? That question leads to an important insight. People who are genuinely at peace with the past usually do not spend endless energy trying to manage how everyone else remembers it. When someone remains obsessed with controlling your narrative, it often reveals that they have not emotionally let go of the relationship, or, more accurately, they have not let go of the influence they once believed they had over your identity. Dr. Ramani often reminds survivors that image is incredibly important in narcissistic dynamics. A narcissist is deeply invested in maintaining a version of themselves that appears admirable, misunderstood, successful, generous, or even heroic. This carefully constructed image protects them from accountability. If they accepted responsibility for the pain they caused, they would have to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Instead, many narcissists choose a different strategy. They reshape the story, Suddenly, the relationship ended because you were too emotional, you became impossible to please, you were ungrateful, you were unstable, you misunderstood everything. Or perhaps they tell others they did everything they could while you refused to appreciate them. Notice what is missing from these stories: their manipulation, their gaslighting, their broken promises, their emotional inconsistency, their refusal to take responsibility. The narrative becomes selective, emphasizing anything that protects their reputation while minimizing or completely erasing the behaviors that harmed you. This is one reason survivors often feel a powerful urge to defend themselves. You hear that mutual friends are repeating false information. Family members begin asking uncomfortable questions. People who only know one side of the story start viewing you differently. The temptation is understandable. You want everyone to know the truth. You want justice. You want your name cleared. But here is where healing requires tremendous wisdom. You cannot build your peace on convincing everyone else to believe your version of events. That does not mean you remain silent in situations where your safety or reputation requires a response. There are times when calmly correcting misinformation is appropriate, but many survivors discover that no amount of explanation satisfies people who have already chosen to believe the narcissist version of reality. The more you argue, the more exhausted you become. Dr. Ramani frequently emphasizes that narcissists often recruit what are sometimes called flying monkeys, key people who unknowingly or willingly spread the narcissist's perspective. These individuals may not realize they are participating in manipulation. They may sincerely believe they are helping someone who appears wounded. They hear one carefully edited version of events and naturally sympathize with the person telling the story. This can feel incredibly isolating. You may think, why don't they ask for my side? Why does everyone believe them? What if people think I'm the problem? These fears are real, but they also reveal something important. You are still looking outside yourself for validation. Healing invites you to look inward instead. One of the greatest shifts in recovery happens when your confidence no longer depends on universal agreement. Not everyone will understand your decision. Not everyone will believe your experience. Not everyone will recognize the emotional abuse you survived. And yet, your healing remains valid, your truth remains real, your boundaries remain necessary. A narcissist often struggles with this reality because controlling the narrative is another form of controlling you. If they can convince others that you were the difficult one, they protect themselves from accountability. More importantly, they hope you will become so busy defending yourself that you remain emotionally engaged with them. Think about how much energy that consumes. You replay conversations in your mind. You wonder who has heard the latest rumor. You draft messages explaining what really happened. You imagine confronting everyone who misunderstood you. Without realizing it, your emotional focus has returned to the narcissist. This is exactly what keeps the unhealthy dynamic alive. Your attention becomes trapped in proving your innocence instead of building your future. Imagine trying to drive a car while staring continuously into the rearview mirror. No matter how determined you are, eventually, you will lose sight of the road ahead. That is what happens when your healing becomes centered on correcting every misunderstanding. The past begins steering your future. This does not mean integrity no longer matters. It means your life becomes the strongest evidence of your character. Over time, emotionally healthy people notice consistency. They notice kindness. They notice honesty. They notice peace. People who truly know you eventually recognize the difference between someone's carefully managed image and someone's authentic character. Character is difficult to fake over long periods of time. Performance eventually cracks. Integrity quietly endures. One of the most frustrating realities is that the narcissist may alternate between criticizing you and praising you depending on what benefits them most. To one person, you are described as selfish. To another, you become the one who got away. To someone else, they may claim they still deeply love you. These contradictions confuse survivors because they are looking for consistency where consistency never existed. The purpose is not truth. The purpose is influence. If portraying you as cruel gains sympathy, that becomes the story. If portraying you as extraordinary increases their status, that becomes the story. If portraying themselves as heartbroken attracts attention, That becomes the story. The facts become secondary. This realization can initially feel discouraging. You begin seeing how little control you have over what another person chooses to say. But hidden inside that realization is incredible freedom. If you cannot control another person's narrative, you also no longer carry the responsibility of managing it. That responsibility was never yours. Your responsibility is much simpler. Live honestly. Maintain your boundaries. Treat people with respect. Continue healing, continue growing, continue becoming the person manipulation tried to convince you that you could never be. One day, something remarkable happens. You hear that the narcissist said something negative about you, and instead of panic, there is peace. Not because the lie became true, not because you stopped caring about your reputation, but because you finally understand that another person's version of you is not your identity. Their opinion is a reflection of their perspective, not the measure of your worth. That realization is one of the greatest gifts of recovery. Dr. Ramani often reminds survivors that healing is not about winning the argument. It is not about exposing every lie. It is not about forcing accountability from someone who refuses to accept it. Healing is about reclaiming your emotional energy. Every minute spent obsessing over their narrative is a minute taken away from writing your own. The narcissist may continue trying to define who you are, but they no longer have the authority to do so. Your life begins speaking louder than their words ever could. Your healthy relationships become evidence. Your confidence becomes evidence. Your boundaries become evidence. Your peace becomes evidence. Your joy becomes evidence. And perhaps most importantly, your freedom becomes evidence. That is why controlling the narrative is often one of the last forms of control a narcissist tries to maintain. If they can no longer influence your emotions directly, they may try to influence how others see you. But the truly healed person eventually realizes something profound. Your reputation may be discussed by others, but your identity belongs to you. The greatest victory is not convincing every person to believe your story. The greatest victory is reaching a place where your sense of self is so deeply rooted in truth, integrity, and self-respect that false narratives no longer have the power to shake your foundation, because in the end, the loudest response to manipulation is not another argument. It is a life lived with authenticity, dignity, wisdom, and peace. And no narcissist, no matter how determined they are to control the narrative, can rewrite the story of a person who has finally reclaimed the pen.